When I tell you that SPY has been making pre-market gaps every day and been filling them the same day, man, I just had to make a part 2 and show y'all. Because if you have not watched the first video of SPY pre-market gaps and still missing out on all this free money because we're still making pre-market gaps and filling them, man, then make sure y'all tap into part 2 because we about to get down in the nitty gritty. So let's hop into it, man. Let's get it. All right. So we're going to start off with today, and then we'll go back. We can go to the left, look at a couple of days. So we have today, April 16th, which is Tuesday, right? And I like to see all my small gaps that we make during pre-market. Now, if there's gaps that's on pre-market that I can't see on a 5-minute chart, all I have to do is go down to the 1-minute time frame and see what I can find, okay? Go to pre-market, and as you can see, I see one gap right here. Okay, we have one gap right here. That seemed like the lowest gap. So we have our lowest gap right here at the bottom, which is at 503, and we have our highest gap. Okay, so we have our highest gap right here. Oh, right. Which is still not filled yet. And we have another gap right here. Right. So we got our gaps, right? So we got the highest gap up here that still have not been filled. We have the lowest gap down here at 503, right? So SPY made gaps today. What happened at open, right? So when the market's open, we opened right here at 9:30, and we straight came up and got rejected, okay? For those who would have said, oh, we came straight and fell straight to our first gap. Yes, we did come straight to our first gap. But we didn't just come there. We tested the first gap first. Like, we tested to see if we was going to fill it or not, because we did hit that level before falling, right? And you can see that right here. Okay, this is at 9:34 a.m. Okay, we came right up to this gap level. Now, did we test it? Yes, we tested. Now, how did it act once we tested? We didn't even fill it. We didn't even break this level to fill the gap. We stayed below it, so we tested and got rejected. That's what happened when we tested. We tested and got rejected. Okay, so this is at 9:34 a.m. right? And this is 9:35 a.m. So the entry was right here at 9:35 a.m. And so this is exactly, you can see April 16, 2024. So you can see this is today. All right. So 9:35 a.m. SPY puts, right? So I literally got in at exactly 9:35. Why? Because we seen at 9:34 that we came and retested the gap fill and stayed below that gap, was not trying to fill it. Let's go back to the charts. Y'all see this rejection that we got right here at 9:34. At 9:35, I am entering calls right here. Puts, sorry. I'm entering puts right here. Boom. So I played puts because I seen that we got a gap rejection. Okay. So I'm like, okay, we staying below this gap. We got a gap rejection. So we're gonna come to the first gap, which is where down here at 503 that we got to the left, right? So we came all the way down to this gap and finally filled it. At 9:47 a.m., we finally filled the gap. So we were able to play puts from there to there, and then this happened.
2 seconds later.
All right, fam. You can see it's still April 16, 2024, right? So after I sent that alert at 9:35, for that, my analyst listened SPY calls at exactly 9:47 a.m. So he sent bottoms at the very bottom at 9:47 a.m. Right? So we was able to play the puts. Now it's time for them cleats. Okay. So not only did I play the puts coming down? But I had my analyst come in at 9:47 and called the calls at 9:47. Why? Because we filled our lowest gap from pre-market. Okay. So not only am I showing y'all how to play the gaps, but I'm actually taking advantage and calling this out on live day trading Monday through Friday, man. Right? So the pre-market gaps is very important. Now, how did we react once we stayed above 947 gap? This gap. We filled that gap, and then we finally came back to this gap up here. Okay. We finally came back to this gap and filled it. And look what happened. Once we filled it, how did we react? Did we stay above it or did we stay below? We filled it, then we stayed below. Again, so what that mean? Another drop, we stayed below it. So what did it do? Came back down to the gap, stayed below this gap, and fell even more. Then we eventually came back to this gap and stayed above. So once we finally stayed above that gap, we came back to this gap and we just came back down, made a higher low, and then we just been choppy. And then look at that. SPY what, y'all? Finally filled that gap at 506. This is today, April 16th. Look at that. We finally filled that gap. I know you remember that first gap we did up here, this little sense. I know y'all seen that. Now we zoom out. All we doing is going from gap to gap to gap. So that's why it's very important. Don't chase the gaps, but see how it reacts once it get there. So above the gap, more upside activity. Below the gap, more downside activity. That's how I look at it. But you see how it maneuvers when we hit these gaps, and how the question is, how do we react once we hit it? Okay. So throughout this video, you heard me keep saying, how did it react once we hit this gap? Well, as you can see, let's go back to pre-market real quick. That highest gap that we got right here, that's the highest. Remember, that's the highest, the smallest will be found in, right? So after every gap, even the first gap right here, 935, where I played put set. My question was, how did we react? Well, we hit it, we tested the gap, didn't fill it, and stayed below. So I played puts. Boom. Once this gap was done, how did we react? Well, we tested the gap, we filled the gap, now we stayed above the gap. Okay. Okay. Now this gap was filled. Okay. How did we react? We came to the gap, we filled the gap, now we staying below the gap. So that's the question you want to ask yourself. How do we react? SPY gaps been happening every day and been filling them really fast, which is SPY making pre-market gaps is normal. Okay. It's not, oh, this is something new. No, that's normal. But the way the momentum is not normal. It's like the momentum is crazy. We've been making way more gaps consistently every day. Before, SPY was not making gaps consistently every single day, and it was these big movements. You know, it's very volatile. We getting more and more gaps, and it's very, very big moves that's happening right now. Okay, so we can look at yesterday, because yesterday had a big drop, and we can even see we had two gaps yesterday, and we might have more, but I'm just remember off the top. That I remember, and this is yesterday at 512 level. As you can see, we had that gap, and we should have another gap on a 1 minute chart yesterday too. It should have been two to the downside. If I'm not, there we go, right there. Yep. Wait, is that it? Yep, that's it right there. Charlie row, rectangle zone. Boop. Boop. Okay. This gap is not filled when we open, right? So you can see how did we react once we did fill it, but we held above it and then we ran. You could have, boom, could make some money there. We did double bottom. How did we react? We ran again, and then once we finally lost it, how did we react once we stayed below it? Once we stayed below it, we came to the next gap. Once we stayed below the next gap, how did we react? Okay, you stay below. We did a nice retest, and then we drop lower. So that's the question you always want to ask yourself: How did it act coming to the gap? How did it act, and how does it react once it hit it? Okay. Well, that being said, entrepreneur, I do have a free Telegram chat. I will drop the free Telegram chat below, and I do have Discord where I'm live day trading Monday through Friday, where you get all my alerts, and you can catch me one on one in the chat, man. So let's hop into it, man. Let's get it.